Yorana et bienvenue aux entrevues Inside the Doc du FIFO 2022 où nous avons l'honneur de recevoir des réalisateurs et réalisatrices sélectionnés au festival cette année. Aujourd'hui, nous échangeons avec Molly Reynolds, réalisatrice de My Name is Gulpilil. Yorana, Molly, and thank you so much for doing this interview.
Hello.
Yes, so let's dive right in. Can you tell us about the topic of My Name is Gulpilil? What does it deals with?
David Gulpilil is Australia's first and best, and I don't mean any disrespect to all our other Indigenous Aboriginal actors in Australia, but he's up there with the best of them, the very, very best, as an actor, as a dancer, as a singer, painter, and he was first discovered in a film. What a turn of phrase. He was first cast in a film called Walkabout, and the rest, it catapulted him to stardom, and the rest, as they say, is history. And David was diagnosed with widespread stage 4 lung cancer 4 years ago, and the medical experts said, this was in 2017, you're going to be dead by the end of the year. And this was very shocking news to myself and my partner and filmmaker, Rolf de Heer, who has done some wonderful work with David, and David in turn with him. So we went over to pay our respects to David and say, David, how are you? And David said, all I would like to do is work. And he was too unwell for Rolf to cast him in a feature film. So me, as a documentary maker, and David and Rolf and I, we discussed it. We said, well, why don't we do the final documentary? But this time the story is told, your story is told by you. And as he says in the film, this is my story about my story.
So can we go back to what you just said a little bit more in detail about how did it all start? You know, where does the motivation to make this documentary come from initially?
Well, basically David's desire to work, and our desire to, and when I say our, that's Rolf and our desire to honor it. And it was a very easy film to get finance, to get people to support it, because David is such a legend in Australia. And for me as a filmmaker, I always like to think, how can I shift my craft? How can I work it all, differently? And David and I worked together on a film called Another Country, which took the grand prize at FIFO 4 or 5 years ago now. That's why FIFO is one of my favorite festivals. And so yes, and so how do we make it? And said, David, what I would like to do is to for you to look directly into the camera and tell it as you see it. I also thought about how people in culturally here, well, maybe around the world, how when we're on our deathbed at the end of our lives, how would that be? And I think we would look back at our lives in sort of in snapshot shots and in mementos, and our mind would jump from one thing to another that is not coherent for most people, but is coherent within our minds. And so I discussed it with David, and David really liked that approach. So really it's David looking back at his life, as and he just jumps from one thing to another. So it's not necessarily chronological, it's more dreamlike. So that was how the film came to be. We were only meant to shoot for we had 40 shooting days, including David's death ceremonies. But David, it gave him a lot of purpose and sustained him. And so he'd say, Molly, when are we shooting again? And we just kept shooting and shooting. And we got up to day 60, well, maybe about day 65. And Rolf said, we can't, this is an expensive business. So Rolf and David and I, we had another team meeting, and we decided we'd finish the documentary with David on the stage instead of his cemetery box. So at March last year, there was the world premiere, and it was wonderful with David on stage. And David came on stage, and everyone gave him a standing ovation. And I thought, they haven't seen the film yet. And sadly, David died late in November. So, his time had come, and he didn't die of the cancer. He managed to live for another 4 years, but it was heart failure. So it was almost like he had called it to himself. He'd had enough. He was miserable.
Oh, wow. So he seems like such an interesting and notorious person, legendary, as you said. So how notorious is he in Australian society today? Because we are from the outside, and we've seen him on some Australian films, but just to get a grasp of the magnitude of his popularity.
Yeah, look, David is a man of two worlds. He no longer really belonged in his traditional culture. He had stepped outside that. But in stepping outside that, he no longer belonged in the dominant culture. So he really was a man of two worlds. He belonged nowhere properly. And I do think that caused him a fair bit of distress, and his celebrity caused him distress as well. So he was for a long time, as he described himself, a drug and alcoholic. He capacity for alcohol was incredible, as well as for marijuana. He really spent most of his time in another state of mind, and it was his way of coping. He could also behave really, really badly when he was under the influence. The worst of his behaviors could come out, and he was known to treat people badly. I think the for me, the wonderful thing is about David is he came to his end of his life. He'd given up alcohol, he'd given up marijuana. He had, I think, returned to the sweet person he was before fame found him. Before, and how do I know this? Because and as it is in the documentary, there's a whole lot of David as a young man being interviewed and the footage of him. And you can see that there is a very sweet person in there. So David is legendary on many, many levels. He's really known, for his capacity for excess, and that also I think he could have had a bigger body of work and gone internationally if he wasn't a man of addictions. So that's David and his legendary status. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating to discover such a character, for us outside of Australia. So back to your creative process when preparing for the film. You were talking earlier about that dreamlike quality of the documentary. So, visually speaking, the film is very impressive in terms of shots. You can see the vastness of Australia, the outback. You can see the Aboriginal culture, and also great film footage of his work. So there's a mix of so many things, and also him speaking about his life, about his messages. So my question is, what was the big thread for the continuity of the film? What was the big thread that helped you structure the whole film from beginning to end? What was your creative process to build that thread?
I think as a documentary maker, it's interesting in our household. Rolf de Heer, he's a feature filmmaker, and he will write a script, and then he will go out and shoot it, and he'll edit to script. As a documentary maker, for me, it's about, okay, what in life would I like to capture, and if I've got if I'm there and I'm working with a camera person, my job, I think, as a director, is to look around and say, what do we want to film here, and for the camera person to film it well. That's the nature of the relationship, in my working dynamic, I think. And with David, David would, I mean, 67 shoot days is a lot of days. And David, he was, as is his Yolngu culture, a very circular storyteller. So with his interviews, he would talk for an hour, maybe 2 hours, and we'd just record it. And I would learn that at some point in time, David would give the gold, and I just had to be patient. And he did every time we did interviews, except for one interview, I think. But in my head, I'd go, "Yep, there's the moment. That's where he sums up what he's been saying." But there are a great deal of other days, for example, where I go along and I think, "Oh my goodness," because I worked with two wonderful cinematographers, Max and Miles, and I think, what must they think of me as a director? Yes, they do deserve an applause. Um, and we'd go out on surveys, and I always thought that David must have looked at his life so often, like when he was on the red carpet or meeting the Queen or whatever else, and go, "How did I land here?" So on some shooting days, we'd go off to a golf course, or, in front of a church or something like that. And I would put David there and I'd say, "David, have a look around you, have a look as though you're in a dream, or, you think, I'm an alien. How did I land here?" So that gave some of the magical footage that we've got. One day he called me up and he said to me, "Molly, my girl, how about we shoot our film in my cemetery box?" And I'm thinking, what's he saying to me? And he started filmmaking when we had 35mm film. So there he had an image of himself with 35mm in his coffin, which he called his cemetery box. And I thought, that is such a brilliant image. So I found some old film that, from one of Rolf's old films, of 35mm film, and we got a coffin from a prop shop, and we laid David in it, in his suit, and wrapped up the film. So there were some of the that was some of how for me, the magical images came about. There's an opening shot with an emu, and that is a remarkable shot. And it was Max who discovered the emu, because I said, "Go and find some locations, I'll get David organized." And he came back and he said, "Molly, I found an emu. Do you want to use it?" And I said, "Of course we bloody well do." So it's about, I think, seeing what, for me as a documentary maker, saying, "Okay, what is around me here? What would I like an audience to see, and how can I stitch it together with what else we've got?"
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you. That very interesting. And indeed, that introduction shot with the emu and the road is it's almost sort of poetic to see him on this road. It's like he's walking on this path, and then there's a sense that the path is not going to end there. Yeah, he's going to keep walking. That's very impressive to open the documentary with. So
I was just going to say, it's almost like the emu and David are dancing together. There's a real simpatico between the two of them.
how long did the whole production take from your first idea to the release of the film? Because you say that the shooting took 60 something days.
No, we shot over 4 years.
Okay.
Yes, so we shot we shot most of we shot about 40 days in the first 6 months because we thought he was going to go, so, as in die. So we was a sense of urgency. Then the rest, because I lived in a different place to David, so to also travel. But then it was a bit about looking after David as well, because Rolf would go and visit David 1 month, and then the next month I would go and visit David and shoot with him. And the editing process happened. There were probably about 3 blocks in that time frame, and so yeah, it was actually 4 years door to door, and I hadn't anticipated it would be so long. I thought it was going to be a 6-month project, so I managed 2 other films in between that time, but it was, that yes, it was one of my longest projects. My Name is Gulpilil.
Okay, and so what were the most challenging part of production and the least challenging part for you?
Whoa, most challenging part. The least challenging part. I think I know how. I think I have it. I think what was really interesting was when I began this project, and I had a great deal of respect and admiration for David. I really did. But David and I did not get on particularly well. We weren't, we'd sort of found our way with each other, and that was partly because David could behave badly, and I think that no one should behave badly, that we can all be kinder towards one another. But when the idea of the documentary came up, I thought, oh my goodness, I'll have to, I'll be working with David. And I thought, but there are two things here. I respect David, and in respecting him but not liking him, I will have, as a filmmaker, a bit of distance. And that I knew I could honor him. I knew that he deserved to leave to have a legacy, to be able to sum up what he had done in his life, in his own words. And so I recognized that. And in starting out and making the work over that 4 years, or over the first 12 months, I came to love David. I came to have a friendship and a relationship with him. And he was terrific to work with, because he no longer had any of his, addictions. And so he was so professional about, the way in which he worked. And so that was that was the great reward and joy in making the film.
So in 4 years of production, do you have one favorite moment that you could share with us?
Oh no! I think there are too many favorite moments that we have there, because there was some really the shoot was tremendous fun, and really there was Max and Miles and myself, and I'd alternate between the two of them. And and I think working with David, there was some just laugh out moments that no, I can't give it to you. Sorry, it was a wonderful experience all in all.
Oh, no problem. I understand totally. So, what is David Gulpilil's legacy on Australian culture and arts today?
I think it's very clear, and so sometimes I feel as though I'm a little repetitive in my answer. But what his legacy was he was the first, and not only was he the first Indigenous actor on the big screen, but he was so good. He was a professional. He was up there with the leading actors of the world in the last 100 years. And so he was the first, and he was in that regard the best. So all the white fellas that he was acting with, he could hold his own. He wasn't just an actor because he was a black fella. He was an actor. He was an actor, full stop. You know, like he wasn't
Mm.
playing the role of an Australian Aboriginal at all. He was, you know, he was an actor, and I think he for so many others that followed, they could all look at him and say, right, David Gulpilil can do it, so can we. And I think that now in Australia we have a really vibrant black fella filmmaking. You know, I think that if we kind of like they're like our black fellas are better filmmakers than our white fellas at this you know in Australian cinema, the caliber of their work, the you know performing arts, the you know the visual arts. It's and I think David was at the forefront of that, and that is what makes him what for me makes him so special. But I'm saying this is a white fella, so you know.
That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing all of this. So, if I had to see one of David's films, which one should it be?
My name is Gulpilil.
Okay, that's your Joker.
Yeah, that is a joke. Yes, I would say the film is The Tracker. Now, The Tracker happens to be made by my partner Rolf de Heer, but The Tracker is a film in which David was his first lead role. He had been always, you know, he'd always sort of played as a part of an ensemble or whatever else, but he was the lead in this film, and it's a beauty of a film. It really is. So that's the one I'm offering up. The Tracker by Rolf de Heer, starring David Gulpilil.
The Tracker, well noted. Thank you. So, how was the documentary received by the public in Australia and in the different festival that it must have been through?
Um, very well in Australia, very well. The film had some wonderful distributors, ABCG Film, and they released the film during a pandemic, so it had a theatrical run, and it did incredibly well because it kind of was navigating lockdowns and all those sorts of things. And then it was broadcast on our national broadcaster, and it was well received there. And then there were the industry awards in which it collected best doco, which was a real, you know, which was great because there was a strong lineup of documentaries. um, and so yes, it has, and that's it's a significant question you ask, actually, because it's all very well to make, and let's assume it's a great film. It's all very well to make a great film about David, but if there isn't the audience for it, then therein lies the tragedy. But to make a film and for there to be a strong response to it is is great.
I have one last question for you. So, did you get any valuable life lesson by being around David Gulpilil all this time? Is there one thing, one message, or one big life lesson? If
Oh yeah. That oh goodness. Okay, you closed on a hard. If there was one, I
I'm
think
sorry.
I don't know. I think it was hmm goodness. There's because I'm thinking about David, and look, I think in the end was that I came to that David and I came to love one another was a really unexpected result, and I think that will, I think in many ways that that sort of that remind that I think that gives some, you know, the comfort, the notion of openness with to others, with others, you know, be always about being open to the possibilities. And that documentary would make the making of it, I always had to be when David kept living and didn't die, you know, when it's like, this is one doco where I just stayed open to the possibilities, and I think it's a really good life philosophy as well.
Well, thank you so much, Molly, for accepting to answer our questions today. It's been wonderful to have you, and we can't wait until the public here discovers My Name is Gulpilil at FIFO online and in the cinemas. And may David rest in peace, love and light. Yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you, Molly. Donc notre interview avec Molly Reynolds s'achève. Vous pouvez retrouver My Name is Gulpilil du 5 au 13 février dans les salles du FIFO en présentiel ou sur la plateforme internet. Merci d'avoir suivi cette interview.